Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Extraordinary Audit Committee meeting, 17th of May at 5 o'clock. We'll move straight on to the agenda. Item 1, apologies. Have you had any apologies?
I'll do apologies, Martin. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, excellent. Declarations of interest. Does any members have any declarations?
Oh, Chair, sorry. Councillor Haynes has sent apologies and Councillor Schmidt has sent.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. I don't see any, so we'll move on to item 3, which is the Annual Governance Statement 2021. And I'll hand over to Nick. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the annual governance statement accompanies the statement of accounts and needs to be reviewed in advance of considering the statement of accounts. Ultimately, when we publish the final statement of accounts, it will be incorporated into that and will be signed by the Chief Executive and the Leader of the Council. But it is a function of the Audit Committee to consider it and consider whether it reflects their understanding and view of the control and governance aspects of the Council. Just to point out that when the draft statement of accounts were first considered by this committee in July last year, there was a version of the annual governance statement attached to that. We are required to update the AGS for any events which happen subsequent to that time and the final signing of the accounts. And so there has been a minor update to the identification of the council's self-referral to the regulator for social housing and the subsequent breach that was identified. And that the AGS now sets out that position and the work that is going on both in Office of Government and through the Cabinet on a regular basis to maintain oversight of that governance issue. So that's on page 4 of the AGS.
That's page 22 of the overall document.
So the evidence base that's been used to determine the AGS is set out right at the very beginning in paragraph 6. The overall conclusion is that the arrangements that are in place are fit for purpose and have been reviewed, and the auditors do also review the AGS as well to ensure that it's consistent with their view of the governance arrangements that they see. There are also, as appendices, action plans both relating to 2021 and actions that have been undertaken and completed in their progress, and also an action plan for 2022. So I think that's all I'd like to say by way of introduction.
Thank you, Neville. So just to remind the committee members, we initially considered this at our meeting on 13th of July last year, so some of us will remember the meeting. As Neville's outlined, there's only been one minor change that's reflective of the housing repairs. You can see that's included, it's brilliant that that's in there. And again, I just would thank the committee for the work that it did around contract management, which I'm sure alerted CLT to do a bigger deep delve and to specifically identify the problems. So it reflects, I think, good work of the committee. I'll just throw it open to members at this point if there's any general points about the government statement that anyone would like to make. Obviously, we covered this at our previous meeting. I think it's worth highlighting on page 7 of the overall document, the statement by leader and chief executive in terms of work there. You can see the bullet points, the development of a new senior management structure. The second point, a new senior leadership team being formed. There's the quarterly corporate leadership team assurance meetings. The corporate risk ratio is reported quarterly to Cabinet and is also reviewed by ourselves now twice a year. And the structure includes a new resources performance and delivery board to monitor performance across the council. including KPIs. And just over the other page, development of a shareholder panel to manage the council's wholly owned companies. So all of these things that are highlighted in the document, I think, show some of the concerns that perhaps the committee had highlighted over previous years, have been listened to and acted upon, and I think puts the council in a better, more robust position. So I think that we have a strong government statement here that we can that's accessible to the public and sets out the direction of travel as council is on in making year-on-year improvements in its operation. So I would move the item to the committee. I'll just look to see what exactly the committee is asked to consider and recommend it for signing by the leader and the chief executive. So I believe we are all in agreement. Yep. So that's unanimous. So thank you for introducing that, Neville. And we'll move swiftly on to item 4, which is the statement of accounts and audit results report, starting on page 37 of your documents. I guess Neville to lead off for us. Thank you.
So again, I think the starting point for this is to say that these are not final absolute accounts for signing. There is still a small amount of work to be done, and the position when the papers were published was set out in the auditor's audit results report, and colleagues from EY who are with us today, Mark and Andrew from EY, will be able to update on progress since the papers were published. But from the council's point of view, we're confident that these are very close to being the final versions, and that's why we're confident to bring them to you tonight for you to see them and give your views on them, because we don't think they will materially change. The actual recommendation, therefore, is for the committee to consider and raise any questions on the item, but to delegate to Annabelle as the council's Section 151 officer approval to give the final sign-off in consultation with the chair of the committee, just to take account of any final audit adjustments that may prove to be necessary in the wrapping up of the work. So I've mentioned the audit results report, and I'll pass to EY colleagues in a moment. There's also the draft letter of management representation to consider, which is provided by Annabelle again as Council Section 151 officer, setting out very clearly for the auditors her confidence in the way the accounts are being presented, that they cover in all material aspects those areas that we would expect to see in the separate accounts. So, as before, you saw a draft set of these in July, and since that time they have been subject to the audit examination, and there have been 4 changes which have taken place, which are set out on page 38 on the agenda in section of paragraph 4, A to D. Changes which arose after the accounts were prepared in July, either through additional information or from further work which was undertaken by the auditors or by officers. But to all material effects, they are the same separate accounts that we saw before. They still reflect an outturn of 1.5 million pounds underspend on the revenue account, and the £9 million underspend on the housing revenue account. And so, obviously, prior to this meeting, we went through a session to understand some of the main statements within the statement of accounts, but very happy to answer any further questions or any questions which are relevant to consideration tonight. I'm not sure in what order you'd like to hear the audit position.
Well, I can see that members have questions at this point, and I do think it's actually worth bringing in Mark and EY at point, but I'll take Councillor Wright's point at this stage, and then it would be great to hear from Mark.
Thank you, Chair. So it's just on the point about the pension liability.
Yes.
We normally hear about increases in pension liability and sort of an upward pressure on pensions. Could you just explain a bit more about why there's this decrease of 3.385 million on the pension liability?
Yeah. So my understanding is that there, I mean, it is a decrease, but overall there still remained an increase in pension liability. Actually, what happened was that the valuation information that the pension fund used, that they found a small error in it that caused that change. But I mean, pension liabilities can increase and reduce around lots of factors like longevity and the profile of the pension fund members. So it is possible for there to be variations both ways. But that was just that particular change was a variation that occurred between the original valuation information and some revised information.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that point, Councillor Campbell.
Close that, if you don't mind, Chair. Because that's not a nice one. Try and stop. Overall, that net position was a £34 million increase in the losses on the pension fund overall between the 2 years. So unfortunately, that, as Darryl explained, that is the change through the audit process that was identified. But overall, there was a £34 million increase in the liability.
So it's a little bit of positivity in another one. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for that point of clarity. I think it would be advantageous at this point to bring in Mark and EY. We've received your draft report and we've all had an opportunity to look at it. But Mark, good to see you again in the flesh. Welcome back. And please do tell us about your report.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. So, firstly, I think apologies that this report is later than we had originally planned it to be, and I'm sure you expected, but clearly a number of issues that have impacted our timeline, which we'll continue to discuss with Annabelle once we've concluded. But this meeting and this report is focused on providing you with assurance of the audit process, and so you can approve the financial statements as set out by Neville. So we will focus on that alone today. So here are the key messages. So page 205 of your pack, our materiality level for the audit is 2.924 million. So any errors above that would cause us an issue for our audit opinion. Currently we have none. And we are reporting audit differences above a threshold of £146,000 to you today. On page 206, as Neville said, we had procedures which were outstanding at the date we issued this report last week. I can give you an update against each of those as they have progressed since then. So in terms of the management letter, the recharges and accounts receivable, we are working through those yet to conclude. Capital financing reserve, we have completed and there are no issues. Housing revenue account, we have completed disclosures and income with no issues to bring to your attention. We have expenditure just to complete. Collection fund, we have completed with no issues to report. And group audit, we have completed. We're just waiting the set of accounts for Norwich North Building Limited. No issues to report, but there is a change to note 32 as per Neville's handout. And then whole of government accounts, we're still waiting for guidance from HM Treasury, so we cannot conclude on that. And then all the rest of the closing procedures we'll get to this week after the approval through this meeting. So in terms of risk areas and the assurances gained on pages 209 and 210, which I think is the focus for you as a committee because it allows you to see how we have deployed our audit procedures to gain assurance against each of the risks that we identified and brought to your attention in our audit plan, is a good news story and position, I think. So in terms of the fraud risks in respect of management override and incorrect capitalisation of revenue expenditure, no issues to report to you, so clearly that's good assurance. And the same on movement in reserves statement risk. That is now complete and there are no issues to bring to your attention. Similarly, COVID-related grants, no issues emanating from our audit. Importantly, I think that same is true for property, plant and equipment and investment property evaluations. All the work has been completed and there are no valuation issues to bring to your attention. For context, I would say that's one of the few audits I have when there's been no valuation differences identified, so I think we should take that into context. In terms of national non-domestic rates, we have identified that one over-provision issue of £192,000 because of a change in guidance, and the provision has now been adjusted within the revised statements before you today. And then pensions, as per your question. So as the auditor of Norfolk Pension Scheme, the asset valuation through the audit increased by £43.8 million because of the timing difference between the date they used valuation data for their draft accounts and audited final data. Usually an increase in assets means a decrease in liabilities because they offset each other, and the Norwich's proportion of that and the impact on your liability was that £3.8 million. So that's a decrease to the number you had in your statements, but as Neville said, an overall increase year-on-year step. In terms of group consolidation work is now complete, and as I say, just waiting for a copy of the draft accounts just to cross-check that to note 32, which is on that handout before you. In terms of...
Could I just come in at that point? Obviously you're waiting for those accounts. Is it an issue with getting the accounts from the body? You know, or their accounts not produced? How comes that that's still outstanding?
So the accounts have not been audited.
Right, so their accounts have not been audited.
But we haven't yet. Excuse me. And therefore we were waiting for the audit, because ordinarily you would get a set of audited set of accounts upon which to rely. Because it hasn't been audited, we have done alternative procedures so we can rely on the draft figures that are quoted in this note, but we need to triangulate that back to the draft accounts that are with the auditors, and that's the piece of the document we're waiting for.
Who do those auditors? Is it us or you?
North's auditors at PwC.
Who is it, sorry?
North's auditors at PwC.
Thank you, Mark. Sorry, carry on.
That's right, no problem. So accounts receivable, no issues to report, and collection fund disclosures we have now completed our procedures and there are no significant matters to report. So I think that whole table for you and those updates for you provide assurance against what we consider to be the significant risks in the financial statement as a whole, and therefore how we've got to our conclusion. So moving to audit differences on page 232 of your pack. We have one unadjusted audit difference currently in relation to a redundancy provision of £154,000. This is a classification error and should have been classified as an accrual sitting in accounts payable in the accounts, and should be reclassified as an accrual because the timing and the amount were known at the balance sheet date and there was no uncertainty, but it's only a classification issue, so not significant. They're clearly £154,000, not material. Management have chosen not to adjust for it, and I'm sure Annabelle can give a rationale, but the responsibility of this committee is to concur with management or ask them to adjust for it. And Annabelle would need to refer to that in her letter of representation with the reasons.
Shall we just take that as a point at this moment and let
Sure.
Annabelle in, just so that we can have that assurance? Thank you.
Yes, it's fundamentally when you look at the balance sheet, it doesn't actually move between categories. As much as we acknowledge the fact that it should be moving out of the provisions into the accruals, it doesn't actually change the net liability position. Therefore, given the timing of the audit identification, we've just requesting the audit committee acknowledge the fact that it's within that overall net liability position, and therefore I would propose that we don't change it. As we say, it's not material, it's already worked its way out of the system of this year's account, so we're just requesting that we let it go as it is.
Yep, and I'm seeing nods from the committee, so I can take that as an agreement. Sorry, Mark, please continue.
No, it's fine, thank you. And then on the same page, we have three corrected audit differences, the biggest of which is the pension disclosure change, which was a timing difference. As I said, for information at the pension fund level, the other two are only just above our reporting threshold, but are there for information. So overall, again, if you take all of that page together, very few audit differences to report, which I think is a good outcome for an audit of the size and complexity that we have here. And the fact, as I said earlier, with no property, plant and equipment or investment property valuation differences on that page is a good result.
Yeah, just to pick it up, the property and plant, for that to come back and square out, you know, that wasn't a concern. We were talking about that in the past as well. And so I think that again shows, you know, excellent work by our officers in producing the statement of accounts. Sorry, Mark.
No, thank you. So taking all of that together, that would lead me to conclude that we will be in a position to issue an unqualified audit opinion, the form of which is set out in section 3 for you. And indeed, we have issued a request for a standard letter of representation, so there's nothing special that we are asking for within the letter that Neville referenced that Annabelle will need to sign. So that's it in terms of the accounts. In terms of value for money, which is section 5, our work didn't identify any significant risks, which again is good news. Therefore, we haven't had to undertake any additional audit procedures to address any risks, and therefore, as a consequence, we have no matters to report by exception within our audit opinion. Again, so that's a section within section 3 of our audit opinion. We have prepared a commentary, which is Appendix D of our report, which sets out how and what assurances we've got to be able to come to that conclusion. And that conclusion is in draft for you, so you can have sight of it today, but that will formally go into our auditor's annual report, which we will issue once we have signed the audit opinion. And that then forms a base year of the arrangements and the commentary from which we will build in future years under this new approach that the National Audit Office has applied. So I think that takes you through all of the work that we've performed, all of the assurances that we've gained, and therefore the conclusion and the audit opinion that we will be giving once the remaining procedures that Neville highlighted are just concluded. But clearly happy to take any questions on any of the other detailed elements.
Thank you for that, Mark. I'll look to members to see if there are any points that wish to be raised. Okay, so yeah, I mean, I think your reports, thank you for doing it. There's obviously difficult circumstances for yourselves at your end, Mark, in terms of COVID at the time, and and trying to, having to do screen sharing, etc., not being able to get in person at some points. Obviously, there are resources in the industry. I would conclude that the document shows that the external audit here backs up the work that the council have done, and is a good endorsement of a good assurance for the committee. I suppose, Mark, I have to say that we're sat here nearly a year on from producing our statement of accounts. We've got another set of accounts to come soon. Still not officially closed at the moment, your audit work. Obviously, the committee is highly concerned about the length of time it's taken for the external audit to take place. Could you explain to us some of the reasoning behind why we still sat here today doing it, and what kind of assurance can you give this committee that we're going to be able to make this back up? Because ultimately, it puts a lot of resource pressure back on the council when the time becomes more and more extended. So if you could explain what happened this year and how your company hopefully will be able to mitigate it next year.
Good questions. Happy to expand for you. So I would set out from the outset, though, that this is not a new issue. This is a set issue as reported through the Redmond Review and a number of other national reviews that have been reported into DLUC as the overriding committee. So this audit world, if you like, is under significant pressure. the number of audit opinions in total that were signed at the 30th of November, which was the date for publication, was 9%, which is clearly a long way short nationally, and even at the 30th of April, well, how many days late? The 30th of April, it was only 53%. So whilst that's, you're still in a quite a big bucket of people who haven't had their assurance, that's not a good place to be, clearly recognise that. And I think it emanates from a couple of things. One is COVID, as you referenced. Two is historic resourcing issues going back 3 or 4 years. And then 3 is the additional regulatory burden on all auditors and the amount of work that auditors have to do across a number of risk areas, pensions and property, plant and equipment being 2 of the biggest, for sure. When you add those up, and then you have delays for 2018-19 audits and 2019-20 audits, we had phased our plan to get back on track for that, but there are audits in this cycle which have had significant reporting issues, and to get to a significant reporting issue, you have to do a lot of audit work, which takes a lot of audit resource, and therefore there's just an impact on what is a finite amount of auditors in the world to do it.
Mark, can I just come in at that point and appreciate that. So what I would say is, as far as I understood, people had that 4 or 5 weeks, and if they didn't complete, they got sent to the back of the queue. So that doesn't really stack up for you, because we were ready to go, and if other councils were having issues, surely they went to the back of the queue, so they should have respected our process. Would you not agree?
Good challenge. So audits that were not ready did go to the back of the queue, and there were a number of those. But clearly, if you're working through an audit and you get 80% of the way through, for argument's sake today, and you find a property, plant and equipment issue, and you've got 20% of it to resolve, you resolve it before you start the next batch of audits, and it is that delay. There have been some where the issue that has been found has been so significant that it would have required significant resource, which would have impacted on the next phase, and we have pulled out of those audits and told them to sort it out and come back. But we are talking a very finite amount of resource in my team, per se, that I can deploy at any one time across a number of audits. And it's clearly unfortunate, and I have apologised for the delay, but I am very limited with what I can do with a handful of a team across a number of audits.
Let the council driver in at this point.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the dates we've got in here for next audit, and the dates you've got in here, June, July, August and May next year and stuff, can you guarantee that we're going to make them or not? And if we were well ahead this year, and I know it's you were short staffed, we were probably short staffed, but everyone was a bit behind, but ours were ready to go. Why didn't we find these things what put us out, if you know what I mean, put us all at a time? Why didn't we find them 8 months earlier, or 9 months earlier? Why didn't early show them find them? How come they only got found right at the last minute when the council voted to be signed last time?
So for clarity, we are not short of staff. We might not have enough staff in an ideal world to do everything we need to do, but we're not short of staff.
Okay.
So
I
said there are shortages in the audit world. Well, I have the amount of people in my team that I am meant to have, but we have more work now because of the backlog than had been planned. There are no assurances, well, there's no guarantees, not assurances, that next year's timetable can be adhered to. We have worked with officers across all councils to come up with a plan that is the best laid plan in advance, but clearly all plans have the ability to change depending on circumstances. But we have planned it, communicated it, and are about to commence it, and we will see how it goes, and we would like to adhere to it because we want to get back on track as fast as you do, because it's not in our interest to have audits that are delayed and going on and on and on, because it's stressful and it just causes problems all round, basically. So we need to work with all of our clients to get through all of the audit work as fast as we can, and we have a plan to do that. We need everybody in that plan to play ball and all the accounts to be robust and supported on day one of the audit. Otherwise, we go back, as you said, pulling out and going back, and then it gets a longer queue. So we're in a proverbial no-win situation currently, but that is the plan, and that's what we're intending to do.
Thank you. I'll let Councillor Driver in and then please.
Yeah, just at our chair and vice chair briefing meeting before we had audit committee, we got told that this would probably happen the week before Christmas, and the sheriff would come in and start their auditing and all of that. Can you tell me why it's going to take all the way to the week before Christmas that you start next year's work, where we're already into it then, haven't we? That's in a long time, even from now.
It is a long time from now, in calendar months for sure. But as I said, we have phased our audit to be done in a logical, pragmatic manner, and that plan has your council to start as we've been briefed in December.
Okay, just seem I've put our staff under pressure here at City Hall as well, and especially the week before Christmas when everything should be winding down for Christmas. It seems like everything's going to be ramped up for Christmas and there'll be chaos week before there, and people having days off to do their shopping and stuff. And I just didn't know if Paul had a view on this as well, about how we're actually going to manage this. I know Annabelle said we got the staff to do it, but my count of time that we might not get extra staff to actually do it because there's a time limit which is coming in. And I just feel like if we should have been starting now, there seems to be a lot of months between now and December, and it's the end of December, and that just seems a waste somewhere along the line where we could be catching up instead of putting problems onto the city into the next financial year.
Does the cabinet member have a comment?
Yes, I share this committee's concern in regard to this matter. We have just discussed it before, and I'm very upset at the delays that have been involved. And I would very much urge the auditors to move in a more promptly manner in the future. And I know that I and my officers will work towards that to do as much as we can in that way. And I think in that we have the support of the entire audit committee and indeed the whole council.
Thank you, Councillor Kendrick. So I just want to pick up on that, Mark, with what Paul and keep saying. I'm sure you're negotiating in the background, but yet again we've got another excellent report from Norwich City Council. We've produced our statement of accounts on time, be it with the extension, etc. We sat here when we were effectively promised to do December, and we're 4 or 5 months late here. Would it be fair for me to say that, with the work and the ability of our team, that although you are looking at doing it in a logical and pragmatic way, why are we getting pushed to December? What the conversations I'm sure our officers must have been having with you would be that we would want to go early and soon. So can you explain to us why we're yet again coming in one of the very latest tranches in your mitigation plan?
I think you're in the middle of the tranches rather than towards the back end, to be honest. And we've had discussion with all our clients and took views about when appropriate timing was to go. And we came up with a plan that we thought was the best to be delivered at that point in time. And it is as it is currently. I can't say anything more different from that.
Do you think you would catch up with months the following year? So it comes in, what the guarantees for the next year after? I mean, are we going to suddenly do, we lost a year, let's just keep it that year and start again? I mean, because we could be over a year behind soon.
So, if I go back to my opening remark that the audit world, if you like, in the UK is fragmented and broken, I think we are at least 2 years away from being back on a normal cycle. Just my personal view, that's not.
Yeah.
I'm going to let Councillor Giles in just a second. I think I look around for members here to indicate, but I think we are disappointed that we're coming that late in the cycle. I accept you're saying it's in the middle, okay, but I think because of our record, the way that our accounts are externally audited and produce a very high standard each time. Because of the additional pressure it's put on our officers, we're here today to represent Norwich City Council, and I think the committee would share our disappointment that yet again we are coming fairly late in a cycle which is already being late. And so do we share that we are disappointed with the time? And the final point, Mark, it would be, what are the actual mitigations that you're going to be putting in this year that's going to stop these knock-on delays continuing? What's actually going to be different this year?
So I think it's appropriate to acknowledge your disappointment as a committee, and we've taken that on board and we'll take it away. But as I said, we are working within a very constrained market. I'm not sure what type of mitigations you're referring to.
Well, we're supposed to have done this in December and we're sat in May, and we've already cancelled the meeting a month ago to do this. So, you know, that's not good enough to be at this point. And I know there are issues. So what I'm asking is, from your side of it, with still some to be done, maybe even some from 2 years ago, I'm not sure, still outstanding. The work is piling up and up and up. You're talking about not being late next year. What will happen in this cycle that will avoid the problems of this previous cycle? So we're not sat here again in May, June, July doing this again in a year's time.
So all I can say, I think, is that we have planned the audit in a pragmatic, deliverable way. We have an audit team that is at full strength and continues to recruit where attrition occurs, to maintain the resource input, if you like. But as soon as any audits in the phasing plan have issues that take us beyond the budgeted number of hours, then it's an impact on the rest of the programme. And that, therein lies the problem that is both historic and cannot be planned for future. So whilst we have built in a contingency to the plan for an additional number of hours, some of the issues that we have had to deal with and are still tackling are so significantly over budget that you get massive holes in a plan that is then not quite irrecoverable, but takes a long time to recover and get back on the track that I've talked about.
Okay. I think Annabelle would like to come in. Councillor Charles has indicated, followed by Councillor Sands. So if we just take it around with Annabelle, Adam, and then Mike. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose, Mark, a request from me really is the property that you can't actually do from your team that you need your specialist team to look at. Is there any possibility that we could get a slot earlier than your audit date so that we can submit that? Because that was one of your biggest challenges, wasn't it? When you got caught, you were trying to manage the audit slot you got for us, but then you got caught with actually being dependent on another team. Is it possible that we could get a slot before December, I suppose, to get them looking at the property? Because it is one of our biggest issues that we need to make sure we get right on financially.
So two answers to that. So one, we have committed for all of our audits to get our sample selections out before any audit windows start, which would include property, plant and equipment. The valuation team that we have internally is smaller than our audit team, just as context. And when you're in the middle of a global pandemic and property prices are the focus of all auditors' attention, they are as burdened, if not more burdened, than we are. So yes, we can try and get it in, but they have a smaller, not small window a year, but they have a smaller ability to get through stuff than we do. But it is the intention to get the samples out, to be able to have the listing, to get it to the team as early as possible.
Thank you. Councillor Giles, followed by Councillor Sands.
Chair. EY, you're obviously a huge company. You must be having, well, I'd like to think you'd be having conversations with government ministers and civil servants about the sectoral problems and how to overcome them. From these conversations that you're having, do you get the impression that ministers and civil servants understand the gravity of the challenges they face? Do you believe they have a strategy in place to resolve them? And if so, what is that strategy? Thanks.
Very good question. The answer to which is yes, we play a role. Yes, we respond to all consultations that central government departments put out in this arena. And yes, we are vocal in what we think should or could be done to make it better. Yes, they are understood, I believe, but a timeline to resolution of them, I think, is a different ballgame. The FRC, which is the Financial Reporting Council, which is kind of the guardian, if you like, of audit quality and therefore how you get the output, is now responsible for reviewing the delivery of local government audit and has appointed a new director whose key job is to take all of those consultations, all of the responses, and build out a roadmap of how it will look in the future. Now, clearly, doing that is going to take some time, and we're going further down a track before we get resolution, hence why my personal comment was I think we're at least 2 years away from being back on track. So all audit firms, not just us, are playing a key role, but when something is as broken as it has got to, you've almost got to start afresh rather than, you're not just patching up here and there, you are systematically having to review them.
And could you provide some more detail about the measures the government need to be taking to resolve the sectoral problems?
Not in this forum, no. We have responded as a firm to those consultations.
Why are you not prepared to give that information to one of your clients?
I'm happy to have a discussion offline, but not in this forum.
I think that's reasonable, and I'm sure Councillor Giles can speak with Annabelle and Martin and chase that up. Councillor Sands?
Thank you, Chair. I suppose the government's announcement that they want to get rid of 91,000 civil servants is going to impact things for organisations like ours and have an impact on yours as well. But is there anything we can do as an organisation in terms of how we prepare things to streamline things to make it then easier in the audit process later on? In other words, any suggestions that we could do as an organisation to speed things up in future?
Thank you for changing the context. Well, there's no such thing in my experience as a perfect audit.
No.
But you can see from the findings that we've got in a relatively low level of errors that the draft financial statements prepared by officers was pretty robust and supported by good working papers across the main. We're still clearly picking through some remaining areas. What is important, though, and what we have reiterated to all clients, is that a full set of working papers is ready for us on day one of our audit, wherever that window falls, so we can commence the audit in a good manner and make our way through the procedures we need to do in good time. And as Annabelle and the Chair have said, historically, that's been relatively good. So I think I would just reiterate your role in helping our phasing plan get through to the end is to adhere to the window, have everything ready for us, which historically you have done.
Yeah. In other words, we've been pretty good.
And it was actually through some of the final preparation of the working papers that we identified some of the changes that we shared with the audit team that led to the few changes we've had for today. So there's a really positive process there. Mark did say to us, if any of my colleagues want to swap across the county and give me an earlier slot, I could ask the question, but you can understand that they were keen to keep their slots. But I will be waiting for Mark's call if anyone's not ready to go, because we're still trying to produce everything on time, because it's really important for us we can move on. We'll be looking at the budget and the MTFS again before the summer break, and we start that cycle. So it's important for us to be able to close this down, and we'll just sit and have to wait for when the auditing are ready. But anything we can do in between, we will be working with Mark and the team to do.
Thank you. Councillor Driver?
Can I just ask, have we got a definite date when we're going to sign off or not? somebody was talking about the end of this week, someone else was talking into next week. Is it that close or not?
It's close. I think giving a definite date has given me a headache in the past. I'm not going to be held to that. I think the number of procedures we have outstanding is relatively small. Some of them may take a little bit longer than the end of this week, but the end of next week I would say is eminently doable. It just depends on the speed of response and the ability to get through it, but I don't think we're far away.
No, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Mark and his team for all the work that they have done. I've been on audit now for about 4 years, and Mark has always been very helpful and supportive, has answered any questions the committee's put forward, and I think it's fair to say that we recognise the challenges. We are disappointed with the time delays and the slot selection. But I think it's fair to say that we thank Mark for his work and we appreciate the work that he's done with his team as well. So I think with that we can conclude looking at the external report for now, and we'll go back and just go over the statement of accounts. Obviously, if there are any other points that come up and we want to address directly to Mark at any point, please feel free to say. But we'll return ourselves back to the statement of accounts, and as we all know, same committee as last year, we did look at the draft statement, be it 10 months ago, and we've established that there's been very little changes. There has been a page circulated to members, which is slightly new wording, which we can all see is in line with the current position that the external audit is at. I don't have an issue. Obviously, our officers have agreed those slight amendments in that respect. So, to return to the statement of accounts, it's been an unprecedented year. We've had COVID, we've had grants coming in, grants going out, we've had impacts to income streams. I think that's why some of the figures will look slightly different from normal years, but perhaps might bring it in, Neville, just to remind committee members how we can see that the bottom lines effectively and the curves have stayed fairly consistent, although we've had some fluctuations. And then if there are any small points from councillors, but I think we will be satisfied with what we have. But then we just generally outline how, although with those major movements, that the end of year closes are very similar. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Happy to do that. Apologies, I should have mentioned the slight changes which we distributed earlier. But I think if you look in the main statement of accounts document, in the narrative section, you'll find on page 56, you'll find the tables which set out the outturn position, the £1.5 million underspend on the general fund, and the way that flows through to the council reserves. And I think that's probably the best place to sort of identify the significant variations in both the overall expenditure levels and, in this case, the income, but again, more markedly the grants and subsidies, reflecting the additional grants coming in to the council, and on the expenditure side, reflecting the pressure on expenditure that the council incurred as COVID hit in a number of areas, but perhaps the most significant area would have been housing and homeless for the City Council. So I think that sort of demonstrates the level of turbulence that was going on, notwithstanding that the outturn position of £1.5 million underspend reflects both the matching of government grants largely to the expenditure side, although again, as we've discussed previously, the difference between the actual expenditure incurred by the council and the support that came from government to recompense did not match up, and the most obvious example of that is on the income side, where the council was required to make good 25% of income lost, and that wasn't supported by a government grant. But notwithstanding that, the fact that we have an underspend also reflects that some activities didn't occur, so the mayoral events that the council would put on in other years didn't take place. That obviously has a cost-saving implication, and also the delays on capital expenditure on projects and the capital financing of that capital expenditure does have a significant impact. And all of those things together have taken us to this underspend position of the underspend of £1.5 million. And I think again the table below that, again on page 56, showing how that then feeds into the overall level of the general fund reserves, adding slightly by 400,000 to take it just under 10 million, and that in the context of the council's prudent minimum level of reserve at just over £5 million, and the strategy that you have seen going through cabinet of using those resources to smooth pressures over the next 3 or 4 financial years, using that as a mechanism for adjusting the overall council's expenditure over that period of time by the use of those balances. And again, the auditors would have considered the minimum prudent level of reserves and the level of general fund reserves that they are now, and made a conclusion about that. The housing revenue account, similarly on page 58, which is a subset of the general fund, and so therefore included in the overall statements, but useful to bring that out. But again, a planned contribution to reserves of 4.5 million in fact turned into a £9 million increase in the housing revenue account reserve, again mainly attributable to the impact of COVID on the ability of the council to undertake planned repair and maintenance, as opposed to emergency response repairs and maintenance, which still continued under COVID. But again, having a significant impact on the outturn figure. So I think, in overall terms, that is really where the revenue account ended up. And at the bottom of page 59, you'll see again on capital outturn and at the underspend of £66 million, which by any stretch is significant and did lead to some changes in both the borrowing and the borrowing support for capital expenditure, and also the available investment balances that were therefore available. So again, that underspend in capital expenditure feeding through quite clearly into the revenue account. Is that okay?
No, thank you for that, Neville. Could you take Councillor?
Yeah.
I'll let Councillor Driver in at this point.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I mean, you can't say too much on this because it's the same date already and gone and things moved on. But on page 55 in KPI, where there's 27 more than 26 screens, and 27 now were red, 5 red, 9 amber, and 6 we can't find any data for because of COVID. Have we got that data now? Completely from those 6, have that been resolved? So that will come into there. And shouldn't we be worried about how many red and amber ones we've got? And shouldn't we be auditing that kind of thing now, instead of waiting to be told by or just to say we think that's where you should be putting your resources?
So the actual assurance process that we mentioned in the annual governance statement shows that we now have a quarterly assurance report.
Yeah.
So we report through to Cabinet on every quarter, and that shows the movement on the RAG rating on any KPIs. fundamentally some of this just was not going to be available because it was COVID and it just was not possible. And we've just been open and transparent because what we didn't want to do is to show a missing KPI number from what we'd originally set out to do. So we've just been completely transparent here. But during 21-22, we're just literally tomorrow morning we're going through the assurance report before it goes to Cabinet in June, looking at the KPI outturns, and again we've gone through that process. And you will get a very positive update when you see the quarter four assurance report for 21-22 and how we've actually...
Will it come to us first or Cabinet?
No, it goes through to Cabinet for review.
Okay.
What we bring here to you to review is the risk element
Yeah.
of that report, and we give you a discussion around that because that's where we're looking at around the control functions of it.
Okay, my argument, I think these at risk and we should be doing it now. Are we doing it?
Yes, and we have done during 21-22. So we did a complete review of what the KPIs were and whether they were relevant, and they were approved prior to the start of 21-22, and we've been reporting them throughout the year. I can get some more information if you want, I just don't have it here with me today, Councillor Guy.
A lot of health and cabinet on those 12 on some of those. So it seems more all green than it is green and
Yeah, so the performance of the council is actually monitored through Cabinet, and that's where that quarterly report goes. But as you're aware, there is a scrutiny function. If there was any concern around that, then scrutiny could obviously call in any review that they wanted to do in relation to that. But
I'm on that as well. So,
Yes, we're lucky to have the potential chair of scrutiny and vice chair of scrutiny on audit, so I'm sure they'll pick that up in their work programme. I suppose I would. I'll just pick up on this. Is that is that we've done really well. This report's excellent. The narrative report is clear. The figures that Neville kindly took us through shows that although turbulent year, the council managed its funding very well. I suppose a small question in Mark's direction is that we have reserves. He's aware of our medium-term financial strategy, where we're looking to smooth using reserves. You've not flagged anything, Mark, in your reports. You know the direction of travel is to take us down towards the minimum provision of just over 5 million. Do you have any comment on that direction of travel?
I think a broad comment would be it's not unusual to see councils using reserves currently across the medium term, given where local government finds itself. Our key question, though, is around the minimum level, and I get very nervous when it goes anywhere close to the minimum level or below. Clearly, that is a professional judgment for your Section 151 officer. And we don't disagree that it's an appropriate level to set it at. At the moment we are comfortable, but clearly as medium-term financial plans evolve and go further out, any more pressure on that minimum level would become more of a focus and would probably attract more reporting or consideration from us. But as we stand here, based on this set of accounts, we are comfortable with where it is.
I'll let Councillor Giles on just half a second, but it's worth just pointing out yet again that the fair funding review from central government hasn't happened. All the time I've been on audit, it's not happened. I'm sure Boris has got it top of his list, and he'll put those 90,000 out of works, civil servants to it, right way. So yeah, I'm not holding out much hope for that, but really, local government needs to see central government make up its mind one way or another, wherever that funding falls, so that we can at least produce, real medium-term figures. It's a frustration, and we feel for our officers trying to wait for the golden limit to fall. But Councillor Giles.
Thank you, Mark. I was going to ask how our minimum proven government reserves compares to other district councils and similar size.
So, not dissimilar, but clearly every individual Section 151 officer deploys their own professional judgment based on the risks that they know their organisation has, and therefore what level of reserve they need to cover that versus their usual annual spend. And whilst benchmarks are nice and councils are similar, I don't think they're that similar anymore because of the way they're set up, subsidiary companies, commercial portfolios, and just the demographic and the risk profile. So my benchmark comment is not hugely dissimilar, but I don't think you can compare, or we're not comparing an apple with another apple.
Thank you, Mark. I suppose a small sort of final bit for me is obviously the narrative report's there. On page 27, it talks about Norwich Regeneration Limited. It shows in the bottom paragraph of that page, as we all know, they made a £3 million repayment on their loans. In the paragraph before it, it says that property that it is renting on the private sector market is valued at 2 million. Work is in progress on assets of 8.25 million. So that company has around about a value of 10 million. On the following page, it does say, at this stage, the total level of investment in loan and equity to the company to deliver the business plan is likely to be in excess of 20 million. So it's good that they've repaid some of the loan, although interest has been beneficial. It does go on to say that the results of this will be considered by council and used to inform future investment decisions. So there are questions in future for the council about NRL. It does stagger me that it's worth 10 million and it owes us 20 million, and it's a house building company, so it doesn't seem quite right. But I'm sure under current management, it will continue to work back that deficit that is created in building houses. So I look forward to seeing that continuing to improve. I think for myself, that's the final comments that I would make on that. I do know, as Councillor Kendrick would rightly say, that there has been returns in the investment portfolio, and it does say 14% of the general fund is funded by the investment programme. But it is worth mentioning that that is £100 million of borrowed money to be that 14%, which is, intergenerational debt for this city. But, it has helped protect services, and so there is no denying that by being 14% of the general fund. Let's just hope we can get back 100 million or more. Okay, so that's comments from me. Is there any other comments from anyone else? So we can see there's minimal changes. We appreciate Mark's report. We're looking forward to it all being signed off, and I think that we can agree to delegate the final signing off as set out in the item. Are we all agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, so the committee agrees with that item, Jackie.
That's 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah. That's all 4 recommendations. Everyone's fully in agreement. That's excellent. So that brings this item and this meeting to a